All right, we are just about 3 weeks away from the NFL and from college football, and fantasy football junkies are going crazy right now trying to determine which way to go position by position. So, to help you out, we bring in Elizabeth Sturdivant of 3 Yards in the Cloud to help us out on our fantasy football drafts. All
Hey,
right, Elizabeth, you know the deal
hi.
with me. I don't play any fantasy football myself, and people are surprised by that because I'm kind of a football geek. I love it. I love it. I love it. But I just don't play fantasy. But you're going to kind of set us up for what we need to look out for in regards to starting our football draft, and then we'll kind of grind down to some more specifics. So, of course, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate this. I love this, even though I don't play. I love football, so this is always a good talk.
Yeah, and look, fantasy football, it changes every year. And I think this year, if there's ever a year to draft a wide receiver in the first round, this is the year. And that's not normally the case because look, if you can get Aaron Rodgers or Andrew Luck in your first round, you got to take them. But for the rest of us who are not going to be able to draft them in the first round, you got to look at your wide receivers. The running backs and the wide receivers pool is very deep this year. And there's a lot of value at the bottom for quarterbacks. So you can wait till the later rounds to take your quarterback, which in past years, they've always taken the quarterbacks in the first round. So this year, hands down, number one draft pick for me is Odell Beckham Jr. This guy is the sickest athlete in the league, and he lit it up last year in only 12 games. But this year, he's going to have Victor Cruz at the other end, keeping defenses honest. And so, look, Eli Manning, there's not many quarterbacks that I trust to throw the long ball other than Eli Manning. And I think Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be a recipient of the Giants airing it out this year. So Odell Beckham Jr., hands down, number one.
And Elizabeth, that's a great point with Eli Manning. He's had a couple down years. Actually played fairly well last year, but because they didn't make the playoffs, most people consider it another down year for Eli Manning. But in terms of chunk yardage, getting the ball downfield, there are a few better than Eli Manning. I kind of question, though, with Victor Cruz back, if he's going to take some catches away from Odell Beckham Jr. So you can look at it that way as well. The Giants are going to be very pass heavy in some shootouts and are going to need yardage from the passing game in the fourth quarter, and not one of these teams that are really good but can sit on the ball in the fourth quarter. So it sounds like a great pick to me. I'm hearing out there, Elizabeth, from fantasy football junkies that there's a philosophy out there that you can even possibly, depending on the draft setup, you could possibly skip running back, let it go. Just let it go, and then pick up the crumbs at the end of the draft. What do you think about that?
I'm not all in on that philosophy, but I know where they're coming from. It's because the running back pool this year is just so incredibly deep. There are a ton of rookie running backs this year that are going to be great fantasy football picks. But I don't think you pass on your running backs early. I think you stock up on your running backs and your wide receivers early, and you wait to take your quarterbacks late. I stick by that strategy. And look, there are several running backs that I love this year. But when I look at the running backs, it's one of those things that you can't fall in love with your past running backs just because of what they did in years prior. You sort of got to think of them like your driver. If you're playing golf, you can't swing the Callaway Big Bertha anymore. You got to upgrade to the latest and greatest. And with running backs, you got to upgrade to the latest and greatest. And when I look for a running back, I don't just look at the running backs themselves. I look at who's their play caller and who's calling the plays for them. And there are three play callers that I'll go all in on. I'll go all in on Gary Kubiak with the Broncos. I'll go all in on Norv Turner. And I'll go all in on Kyle Shanahan with Atlanta. So number one running back for me is C.J. Anderson with running Gary Kubiak's zone blocking scheme.
That's really interesting because, yes, running backs have been devalued in recent years, and then we suddenly saw two selected in the first round of the NFL draft, but they may turn out to be very special players. it has been devalued for the reason that you just give. You can't rely on what's happened the last couple of seasons because the burnout factor comes extremely quickly, and these guys hit the cliff and they're gone. 1,500-yard rushers are out of the league sometimes 2 years later. So it's amazing. You got to stay ahead of the curve and understand who is a fresh talent that is just emerging and coming into their prime. And you mentioned a few guys there. So let's look at your possible busts and your possible sleepers, because there's so much information out there. And I played fantasy baseball for years, and I loved it because you could take advantage of certain people. And those days are almost over if you're in a fairly competitive league, because there's just so much information out there. Everybody knows like 90% of the information. So you just have to try to find an edge here and there where you know something that maybe somebody else doesn't know. So the booms and the busts are huge to know who those potentially could be.
Well, my bust, for the same reason that I'm looking at the play caller, right, for your running back. So my number one bust for our running back is Justin Forsett out of Baltimore, because last year Gary Kubiak was calling his plays. And he just emerged out of nowhere and just gifted the fantasy football world with great stats. And because of that, this year he's supposed to be a top draft pick. And a lot of people are going to pick him early on because of what he did last year. But with Gary Kubiak leaving to go to Denver, I think it's going to hurt Justin Forsett. And you got to look at it this way. Alondas Gary and Mike Anderson, when they left Kubiak's system out of Denver several years ago, you never heard of them again. They were a product of the system. It's similar to Pamela Anderson. She was a product of the Baywatch system. You know, insert hot chick into red bathing suit, let her run on the beach. You have an instant Baywatch success, right?
I don't know if that analogy is working for most men, but it's an interesting analogy you've got there.
I hate to break it to them, but yeah, Pamela Anderson is interchangeable. And I think especially in Gary Kubiak's system, in his zone blocking scheme, the running backs can be interchangeable, which is why C.J. Anderson is going to really benefit from his play calling this year, whereas Justin Forsett is going to be a disadvantage. And so I would not take Justin Forsett early on in my draft. But another guy that I like as a bust this year is Marshawn Lynch. With the exception of Tom Selleck, because I think he's the man. Old guys just don't get better with age. I don't like Marshawn Lynch. He's 29 years old, I believe. He's got over 2,000 lifetime carries. And I don't trust him to be a top draft pick this year. So I think he's going to be a bust.
Okay. So I know somebody from work who actually plays a draft in which they select defensive players. Are we dealing with defense at all here?
Well, no. I mein, if for defense, I would take the Jets defense. They're top on my list. But I would just say the Jets.
So, not to throw you a curveball here, Elizabeth, but scanning offenses and defenses in the NFL, are there any defenses or offenses that come to mind that for the average fan, they think, oh, great offense, but maybe overrated? Maybe the Broncos come to mind as prolific, Peyton Manning running the controls, but because of his health and possibly declining play, maybe they're not going to be as powerful as they have been in recent past. Seahawks considered the dominant defense in the NFL, but maybe they're slipping. Any possibilities of what is considered to be the norm, not necessarily being the norm when it comes to high-powered offenses declining, or defenses that have been dominant that may not be so much this season?
Well, in fantasy football, you're drafting the individual player on offense, and in defense, you draft the entire defense. So with that in mind, a couple of busts. Clearly, I wouldn't take Peyton Manning, who has been good in the past, because he just doesn't have the arm that he used to. And with Gary Kubiak now calling his plays, they're going to have a strong rushing attack. So I wouldn't take Peyton Manning. Also, the same with Drew Brees. They've given Mark Ingram a contract extension. They've invested in their defense. I think they're going to have a heavy rushing attack and a stronger defense this year. So those are the things that I would look at when going through for my fantasy football draft.
So if I've got this right, Elizabeth, you're going to be playing DraftKings.
Yes.
Correct?
Yeah, and you can follow me on DraftKings. I have the username 3YITC. And so you can follow me and I'll see who I pick each week and who I start this week. And that's actually what I'm going to base my show off this year.
You are a brave girl because you put your picks on the line every week. And now you're going to put your selections in fantasy football on the line for all to see how well you're doing there.
Oh, yes. And I can't wait for all of the comments because I'm sure I'll be criticized. Like a lot of people, it's sort of like with the Justin Forsett, he's my bus pick. And that's a pretty bold call considering what he did last year. But I'm sticking to it. I've got my thesis and I'm sticking to it.
So have you drafted your team yet?
I have not drafted my team yet. I'm still waiting for camp. I want to see who emerges as the starters in each position, especially looking at Atlanta with Kyle Shanahan as their offensive coordinator. He has a strong rushing attack. He follows. He's a disciple of his father's zone blocking scheme as well, and. I don't know who the starter is going to be out of Devontae Freeman or Tevin Coleman, but whoever does emerge as a starter, I think you can take one of those guys, and that would be a solid running back to have for your fantasy football team.
So, yeah, although it's already August 11th or 12th, the NFL season starts a little bit later slightly than it typically does. So we're just about a month out from the NFL season. So fantasy people are still cramming and crunching the numbers and getting ready for the drafts, and there's still plenty of time there. So that gives us good reason, Elizabeth, to bring you back once you've got your team selected so we can possibly pick it apart. And I'm sure I'm going to have some other questions for you then.
That would be great. I can't wait.
All right, Elizabeth Sturdivant from 3 Yards in the Cloud, breaking down fantasy football. We hope to have Elizabeth back for that, to see her fantasy football team, and then also to possibly provide us with some NFL picks and some college football picks later on down the line. Elizabeth,
I can't wait.
Time.
Thank you, Mark. I can't wait. It's going to be a really fun football season.